All right, thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Maul.
And this is going to be week 5 of our college football series. So Maul's joining us this week. He'll get to sort of, add some flavor and his opinion to what I had last week as his rankings that we talked about. We had a few games that ended up in upsets. Sorry, Maul. His Trojans went down. That was one of the bigger, losses in terms of both of our rankings for the teams. But just to reiterate what we were going to do is how we're changing up. We're going to talk about our top 12 teams, the first 2 teams we have out. As I mentioned last week, it's not really a playoff ranking because we know that some of these teams like Georgia and Bama are about to play one another. So it's not a prediction of what we think the end of the season's looking like. It's more just like what we think right now. As the season works through, it will become more and more like the playoff because that's ultimately what's going to happen. But with so many undefeateds right now, I think this is just the best way for us to tackle this. So that being said, I think that we'll start on the opposite end this time because I know both me and you had more trouble filling in the back end of the bracket. Number 1 team, I'm guessing still Texas for you?
I mean, they're look like they've been the most dominant. They have been the most dominant. Obviously went over Michigan. It's kind of funny. And we play this game every week. There's like little factors that get thrown into the equation. And it's like, was the win over Michigan in Michigan big? Yes. But Michigan then beating USC, although not entirely unexpected. I think USC was getting a little more help from the LSU win when it turns out maybe LSU isn't that good. But Michigan winning against USC makes Texas's win over Michigan look even better. And again, until some of these other teams play anybody, that's just easily the best, strongest win from the strongest team. So they're the clear number 1 in my opinion.
And really no fall off, in my opinion, from Arch to from Quentin Ewers to Arch Manning. Granted, they haven't played anyone. They don't play anyone this week. The SEC gifted them this cupcake of welcome to the SEC. Go play Mississippi State. And it's like, I feel bad for Mississippi State fans. They have that cowbell to just ring their sadness the entire game because that's going to get ugly. It's minus 38.5. And I'm like, you're going to be lucky if Mississippi's not burning again by the time that game's over because Texas should clearly dominate that game.
And can we just say, just as like an offshoot here, Mississippi State, I feel like always catches this like, it is tough in playing in the SEC. Like there's always somebody looming around the corner, but they always seem to like, if history were to say anything, and I don't think this is going to happen, but Bama's probably going to beat Georgia this week solely for the fact that Mississippi State plays Georgia the following week. And like, tell me I'm wrong that like Mississippi State always plays this like absolute juggernaut of a team after they have like a loss that maybe they either shouldn't have lost or it was like a big game. Like if history was to repeat itself, like Bama's going to beat Georgia and then Georgia's going to come out and just take every single ounce of revenge out on Mississippi State next week. So
I had not even thought about that. That's what happens to State every year.
Always for them poor guys, dude.
Well, that Matt Mitchell thing that he did, the comedy skit, I remember Bama had just gotten beat by Texas A&M, and they're like, in Bama, his like character playing Bama like wasn't talking, was just like mean mugging, and Mississippi State came on. He's like, man, I'd hate to be the guy that plays him. Oh man,
that's it, man. That's running through my mind every week with those guys.
It's true. Well, last week we both had Georgia. Does that remain the same at number 2 for you?
When I originally wrote it out, it was. But, and this is kind of just like me being cheeky because I can. Tennessee's win over Oklahoma was big. I got to give it to them there. So I moved Tennessee into the number 2 slot. And just to foreshadow a little bit, it's primarily only because I know Georgia and Alabama are playing this week, right? If they weren't playing or that game wasn't existed or had already been played, it'd be much easier just to say, yeah, Georgia's clear number 2. But I did move Tennessee after I originally wrote my list out. I moved them up to the number 2 just because they look fantastic. I mean, Heupel wants to be like a good defensive team, which they are. It's just so happens that they're even better on offense. And again, Georgia's non-showing against Kentucky doesn't help them either. So that's why. And I know they're playing Bama this week, and if they beat Bama, I think they'll jump back in front of Tennessee. But as of right now, I got Tennessee number 2.
What's crazy is we did not talk about this before either one of us wrote our rankings. I wrote mine a long time ago. Tennessee number 2. And it's, for me, it's not so much the Georgia game could have impacted, yes, if Georgia just comes in there and absolutely sort of looks like we think Georgia should have looked against Kentucky, just absolutely blast Alabama. I'll probably bump Georgia a little bit higher. I look at Tennessee, the defense, I get Oklahoma's offense isn't what it was under Lincoln Riley. Tennessee's defense did its job, looked good. Offense came out against Oklahoma's defense is a good defensive team.
Dude, I thought Oklahoma on both sides of the ball looked better than I was really expecting. I mean, they were clearly not the better team on the field, and the box score showed it as well. But like, I was not giving Oklahoma that much credit going into that game, and after even watching that game, I was like, "Wow, they're better than I thought they were."
But I look at Tennessee's schedule, and that's the thing that I'm just sort of like, I don't know where Tennessee. Great win at Oklahoma. They have a week off. They go to Arkansas, then play Florida, and then they get Bama at home at Neyland. Guarantee you it's going to be a night game. They set the tone for that game. At what time's that tick off? And I can guarantee you one thing, that if Bama's undefeated or only has the loss to Georgia and Tennessee's still undefeated, that's going to be the night game. Like, that will be the primetime game for the country to watch on October the 19th, third Saturday in October. Play Kentucky, play Mississippi State, and then they have to go to Georgia. The best offense, in my opinion, between Bama and Georgia is Bama. If Tennessee can put up 25 against Oklahoma and their defense can play somewhat well, which they did, I sit back and I go, they have a fighting chance. Like, they should beat Bama at home. If the offense is playing like it is. The biggest test for them, in my opinion, is at Georgia. Can they go to Georgia? Because most like that will be even more prime time. If both teams are undefeated, that's the game of the week. That's the night game. Georgia will be rocking. If Tennessee can go in there and dethrone Georgia at home, like at Georgia, oh my gosh. I mean, the state of Tennessee hasn't yelled that loud since the Music City Miracle.
Yeah.
Like,
I hate to say this just because I usually knock on people for kind of doing this, but honestly, at this point, unless Tennessee loses one of those random games that we're not expecting, they could lose to Georgia and Bama, and they're going to be in the playoff.
Yeah. The 12-team playoff changes everything, but Tennessee looks fantastic. Offense looks really good. He's not a true freshman. It's really his first season as a starter to go into Oklahoma, play like they did. Defense played well. I had to give it to Tennessee, which leads me number 3. I'm sure you're in the same position. I got Georgia at 3.
I got Georgia at 3.
Can't underscore it anymore. It's a titanic matchup in Tuscaloosa this weekend. I'm doing everything I can to bid to try to not be flying during that game. But I sit back and look at it and I go, the keys to me for Georgia is to not get down. Like, who comes, like, Bama has had this tendency under Saban, and now it's sort of Georgia having this tendency. I don't know what it is, that it's like they just sort of come out slow. Like, that Georgia doesn't need to do that, because the longer Bama has all the cards sort of going for them in terms of, like, they're an underdog, they're at home, no one's giving them a chance, everyone's hating on Bama. It's me and my dad were talking about, like, I'd love to be in Bama's position right now as a head coach. No one thinks you're going to win this game. Like, you have nothing to lose. You're at home. People are telling you Georgia's going to win. Georgia's the better team.
Take the Dabo Sweeney approach.
Yeah. Tyler from Spartanburg calling in. You know, I sit back and I look for Bama to come out and come out fast. That if Bama has a chance in the game, it's for Bama to come out strong early. Georgia, they got to put their foot on their throat early. If Georgia can get up by 14, in the first quarter and sort of do Georgia things where then they control the ball, allow the defense to just get after Milroe because now they're having to throw because they're down, Georgia wins by a landslide. But the longer that they let a team that they shouldn't let hang around, because this isn't Kentucky.
Yeah. Kentucky was absolutely. I mean, if Kentucky wasn't allergic to the end zone, they win that. They win that game. I mean, because because I think they were a better team. It was just Georgia played awful that game, just bad on both sides of the ball. And I think that's what's going to come down to in this game is Alabama is clearly better at getting in the end zone than Kentucky is. And I think, although I've already said I don't think he's like this phenom that everybody's kind of making him out to be, I think the game is going to come down to Carson Beck. If we see the Carson Beck that everybody really thinks he's going to be, I think it's going to be a very good, hard-fought match that Georgia will edge out at the end. If Carson Beck shows up slow at all like he did against Kentucky, or we get any bit of that, Bama is too good to let that fly. And again, unless he's able to have some magical turnaround mid-game, which it didn't look like he was able to, like at some point, the whole game against Kentucky, you're just waiting like, all right, Carson Beck's going to start actually hitting guys during that Kentucky game. And it was just, that was it. I don't know if they got caught looking forward. Like I said, they weren't going to. Again, hand up, I'm wrong again, shocker. But I think maybe they just got caught looking forward to Bama. And again, they're just lucky that it was Kentucky, because if Carson Beck shows up like he did, they're in for a long day. And that's Bama's edge right there, and they'll win.
Biggest knock I've had on Kirby, which I say this and I'll balance it. They've really never had a great offense. Did Stetson Bennett win back-to-back national championships? Yes. But the reason that Stetson Bennett wasn't getting votes for Heisman, as you said, is because everyone knew without that defense, you're not as dominant as you appear. It
Correct.
helps when your defense is literally giving you the ball every 3 plays because of how dominant they are.
And to that note, I don't think, and I think I've said this a few times, Georgia's defense, although good, is nowhere near as dominant as they had been those last 2 years or the last 3 years even. So, again, Kentucky was moving the ball on them. It wasn't that they weren't moving the ball. They were moving the ball. They just couldn't get it in the end zone.
100%. So it will be major playoff implications, and especially in terms, when I say playoff implications, it's no longer the 4, it's 12. Do both teams this loss hurt them in the long run of making the playoffs? No. What it really is who's going to get to the SEC championship and secure a first round bye.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if we really talked about this in depth, but it's, where do you want the bye?
That's go ahead, finish your thought. But
do you want to play in the championship against a harder team and then win to get a first round bye to catch someone else in the playoff? Or do you go, hey, I'd rather just avoid that hard game in the SEC or whatever championship, take my week off, play at home the following week against a lesser opponent. I'll get a warm-up game before facing you for real in the playoff.
Exactly. Everybody talks about if you win a conference championship, you get a first round bye. It's like, no, everybody gets a bye. It's just whether you're, like you said, whether the bye is the previous week or the after week. But everybody's getting a bye. Let's be honest. I think the only thing that really matters is the path to the championship after both of those byes, right? Because if you're the number 1 team and somehow number 12 squeaks by, sure, okay, now you get to play the number 12 team, and that's the benefit. But at the end of the day, the bye is, like you said, it's whether or not you got to go play Bama or whether you get to take the week off and then have to play, Penn State the next week or something to that nature. You know what I mean? That's the bye is moot.
The funny thing to me is that the number 1 seed, it's not like the NFL where the lower seed has to go play the number 1. If the number 12 seed wins, yeah, they get to play the number 1 seed. If the number 5 seed wins, they play the number 1 seed. It's
Yeah.
like they get a harder in terms of the committee ranking. That's who's going to end up playing the number 1 seed. It could work out for your detriment that it's like, hey, no, you're now catching who we think was the team that was the best out of a non-conference champ to play next, and it'll be a neutral site game. So that wraps up Georgia number 3. Who do you have number 4?
I have Bama at 4.
So this is where we differ. I had Bama and in the middle of my rankings last time. I got Ole Miss at number 4. I know Ole Miss has not played anyone this season. They played 0 teams. From an offensive standpoint, they're on fire.
Hard to argue.
And their defense is shutting teams down. And I know that they haven't played anyone, but you can sit back and you can look at Penn State. They played Bowling Green. It's a close game. You can look at, Michigan only beating Arkansas State by 10, and then Iowa State blows them out by 52 points the next week. There's those times that you look at teams and you go, hey, yeah, you're playing a baby schedule. And it's like, well, Notre Dame did, and Notre Dame lost to NIU. So it's like, I get that what's going on in terms of they haven't played anyone and they're not going to play anyone until they go down to LSU. Ole Miss to me is just that offense. I would say if they played Bama this coming week, I'd give the edge to Ole Miss just because of the offense.
Yeah, I mean, again, reiterate, they haven't played anybody, but Ole Miss's score to offense to defensive, they've outscored their opponents 200 and only given up 22 points. So again, they're doing exactly what they should be doing, which I'll agree with you is kind of more than what could be said about some of these other teams.
Who's your number 5?
I got Miami at 5, and this is kind of like the same thing with Ole Miss, so I don't hate your Ole Miss pick there. I've got Ole Miss at 6 just to kind of jump ahead, but I talked about this last week as well. I wasn't on it, but I kind of sent it to you as far as there's these middle groups, somewhere between 4 to 8, 4 to 7, where they're good and they're doing what they should be doing, but again, until they really play somebody, it's hard to really leapfrog one over the other, and that's where Tennessee was in that boat last week, but because they beat Oklahoma, that's where I've leapfrogged them up ahead. But yeah, I just Miami's looking amazing. Cam Ward, we were talking about it kind of joking, he's our dark horse for Heisman. All of a sudden now he's a front runner because he's looking fantastic. So I've enjoyed watching them play. The one thing against Miami, which will hurt them later, not now because they're looking great, but is their schedule. Their schedule is just weak. They're playing maybe Louisville, I think week 8, which that should be a good game for an ACC. But outside of that, it's gosh, I just don't know. They're not playing anybody till probably the ACC championship. And honestly, who's that even going to be? Maybe Clemson probably at this point. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, I look at their schedule. They have 2. Virginia Tech looks terrible. That quarterback throwing that ball out of the back of the end zone was bad. Them losing to Vanderbilt. Then they go to Cal. So Cal I sit back and I go, oh, Cal beat Auburn. And then it's well, then Cal loses to Florida State. It was one of those, clearly something doesn't add up here. So it's really, can you get through 2 games? Then they go to Louisville. Then they get Florida State at home. And then it's Duke at Georgia Tech, which is probably their, if they can get through Louisville and Florida State, the only game, in my opinion, that will really trip them up is that Georgia Tech game, just because that, or at Syracuse to end the season right before the ACC championship. It's one of those ones where it's can y'all just hold on and not fold against a team that you have no business losing to?
Yes.
Looking ahead?
Yes.
That will be their big hurdle. But I have Miami at 5 as well, so we're on the same page there. Number 6.
Ole Miss. I kind of already said it. I really like where you put them. Again, looking at those numbers, 200 to 22. That's a pretty large gap there. So, kind of talked about it with Tennessee, but Ole Miss might be the sneaky, and they're not sneaking up on anybody because of how well they're playing. But I'm just saying, if all of a sudden, there's a random injury or they catch them on a bad game, Ole Miss could end up winning the SEC. Like, how wild would it be if it was like Tennessee Ole Miss in the SEC championship?
It'd probably be the most fought over ticket in history because neither one of those teams have been in so long.
I mean, like at the beginning of the season, would I have been shocked if you said that? Absolutely. But as far as like the way it's kind of been going this right now, like I don't give it a high probability, but like would I be absolutely flabbergasted if that did happen? I mean, it's possible. I give it a heck of a higher chance than I would have at the beginning of the season.
That makes me hold on. Now that's the key question. I don't know how that would work out. Honestly, hold on. I'm getting to this point. So let's say the improbable happens, which is Ole Miss wins out. They don't play Tennessee. Tennessee wins out. They don't play Ole Miss. And then there's one other team that doesn't play any of them that if they win out, it's like, well, who do you put in? Which is Texas.
Texas, yeah.
Like, I sit back and I go, well, what do you do? Like, how do you, if 3 teams are undefeated?
So
now,
this was my huge problem with the SEC at the beginning of the season. I talked about this. Is like everybody thought like, oh, we're getting these mega conferences now. Everybody's got to play everybody. We're not doing the like South and North or whatever, East and West. Like we'll have a clear 2 teams. It's like, no, because you didn't set the schedule up that way. The only team that like plays everybody is Georgia. Like nobody else plays everybody else. There's too many gaps because there's all these cupcake games of like, I mean, this exact situation. Like there's so many teams that don't play all the other good teams. And like, I'm a conspiracy theorist against the SEC, but like, you think that was on accident? No chance, dude. No chance. Poor Mississippi State's got to play everybody, but all the good teams get away with all these buys.
I was about to say, you know who drew the short straw? It was Mississippi State because their schedule, oh my, dude, they showed it. I was sitting, me and my dad were dying laughing. Mississippi State goes to Texas. That's their next game. Then after that, they get a bye week to then go to Georgia. Then they play Texas A&M at home, Arkansas at home. Then they get their only break versus Massachusetts. Then they go to Tennessee versus Missouri at Ole Miss. And you're just like, God bless.
Which this is where like people in the SEC will be like, oh, well, that's what you get when you play in the SEC. It's just a tough schedule. Okay, I'm sorry. How come Georgia's schedule looks like that? But you're like, how come Bama's schedule doesn't look like that? How come Ole Miss's schedule doesn't look like that? How come Tennessee's schedule doesn't look like that? How come Texas's schedule doesn't look like that? Like, why are all the teams that you're expecting to compete for the SEC championship don't have the gauntlet schedules? Like, that's where it's like, dude, you really think that was an accident?
Which if I want to buy into the conspiracy theory, where I will go with that is that if that happens and you have 3 teams undefeated and one gets left out of conference championship, so thus that team is automatically relegated to that 5 through 12 position, then that will be the biggest push for them to say, all right, we're eliminating conference champions as the automatic, like, it will help if every conference champion's undefeated at that point. But if they're not, they're going to sit back and be like, no, you should have, let Tennessee or whoever got left out be the number 3 seed because they just, it was a default. Like we didn't expect this to happen. There'll be a lot of blowback, which I'd love it because more blowback, more drama, more podcasts. That's what I like. Number 6.
That was number 6.
Oh, excuse me. My number 6.
Yeah, where's your number 6?
Alabama. This is where they fall. Okay. For me, yes, they're behind Miami, behind Ole Miss. I said this last week. This will be the game that sort of I will get a better feel of who Alabama is on offense. I think their defense is good. Their defense has been flying to the football, playing very well. I like what I see out of their defense. Can they shut down Carson Beck? Can they do the things? I don't think that Georgia's this like mythical offense. I think that Georgia's a very stoppable offense. Kentucky did it. If Bama can't do it, I sit back and I go, well, Kentucky did it. You guys should figure, be able to watch a little film. They won't play a good offense until they play Tennessee. So for me, this is at night, at Tuscaloosa, You everything is set for Bama to win, for Bama to upset. If you can't do it here at home, you're not going to do it here in Atlanta when it's a home game for Georgia. You know, because if they meet up for the Natty, it's here in Atlanta. You know, that's where I sit back and I go, for Bama, this is the game that they will either prove that, yes, we belong. As my dad always says, there's a kiddie pool of teams, 4 or 5 people that are fitting in, and then everybody else is just there for show. Like, we'll find out who, after this week, belongs in that kiddie pool between Georgia and Bama as one of the more dominant teams, that it's going to be the teams that are actually competing for a natty at the end of the season. Number 7.
I got Ohio State at 7. Kind of the same talking points that we've said before is like they haven't really played anybody. They're handling business, just not quite as dominantly as everybody's making them out to be. I think Ole Miss is a perfect example of like they're dominating people. Ohio State is winning, but again, they're playing super weak teams and like they're not coming out. The box score looks dominant at the end, but like not at any point am I watching Ohio State being like, ooh, everybody else better watch out. You know what I mean? Like I watch the Tennessee games and I'm like, dang, Georgia better watch out.
Yeah.
I see Ohio State, and again, it's like they look fine, but it's like, yeah, anybody can look fine against Marshall or Kent State. You know what I mean? Like, so they're a fine team, but again, that's why they're at the back of this grouping because again, I just don't think they've done anything to really garner a higher vote, let alone a first place vote like the AP poll is giving them. Which, dude, I get it. Like those things kind of change around, but it's just like who is really like truly watching every football game unbiasedly and going, yeah, Ohio State's the first place team. Like, really? Who's making that vote? Find that out. Take that guy's vote away. Like, because it's just you just stop with this. Like, it's ridiculous.
This is what leads to why, in my opinion, the NFL's better. Like, the only way to make the NFL better and where the NFL would be the clear-cut favorite is if you could take the passion from college and put that into the NFL, where like NFL stadium crowds are rocking like Tuscaloosa will be. Like, the only I'd love to go to the game Saturday night. Why? Because I know like that atmosphere will be like anything other.
Oh yeah.
And until you go to a college game where it's prime underlying, you go to Tuscaloosa, you go to Baton Rouge, you go to Tennessee, you go to USC, back in like 05 when the team was hopping, you go to Oregon at night, or Corvallis with Oregon State, like when they're playing Oregon, like all those games, the whiteout, at Penn State, that's an atmosphere. Like you can't get NFL teams to fill the third deck. So if they ever got that type of passion to be there, but where the NFL has no problems is exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, who is voting them the number 1 team in the nation right now? Like,
it's a joke, dude. And like to your point that you've made before, where you go like, you don't necessarily want to like take away the history, but like where you were talking about like actual national championships, like anything prior to the BCS needs to be wiped because because again, you get these people where it's just like, oh, I'm an Ohio State grad, so I'm going to vote him number 1, dude. You've lost your ability to vote. Like that's ridiculous. That's a legitimate thing still right now.
100%.
And I'm not hating on Ohio State. Again, they're a fine football team, but it's just like when you're watching everybody else play football right now, like nobody without an unbiased view is looking at Ohio State and going, they're clearly the number 1 team. That's a joke if you actually believe that.
What's the difference between me and you voting and that dude? It's just the fact that dude's got a job at a newspaper.
Yeah,
like he's been hired on,
and that he's an Ohio State fan. That's the
like,
biggest difference.
That's it. Like all it is like some dude's opinion that's now like we're like using as like, oh no, that's a matter of fact. Like they're the number 1 team, and I'm just like, no. It's just some dude that's doing exactly what we're doing on podcasts, except he's just writing a newspaper for the Associated Press that we're now taking and saying, oh, that guy's opinion matters, which is why I have such a problem with the committee, because in the committee, it's like, we don't even know how the votes came out. Like, it's just hidden. It's just like, well, they're the number 5 team. It's like, well, was it unanimous? Like, what was the votes like? And it's like, well, we don't tell you that. And it's like, well, I think you should. Like, something seems fishy. So I've got Ohio State at 7 as well, followed by at number 8, I've got Penn State.
Same.
All right. Well, Penn State, we won't. I sit back and look at their schedule. It will be it will be a huge game for both. I don't want to sit back and at USC will be huge for Penn State. This week, it's sort of a trap game. I don't like Illinois' offense. Did they get a good win last week? Illinois did against Nebraska, yes, but in terms of who Illinois is, like they're not this like school that Penn State should handle their business. Then they get UCLA at home before going to USC, which USC is now sort of backed into this corner of if you want any chance at a Big Ten championship, you can't lose again in the Big Ten play.
Yeah.
And then you really can't be a 2-game loss with the only hope would be is then you beat Ohio State and you're sitting there with 2 losses. You need a lot of other teams to lose to put you in a better position.
We would also need, and I don't think this is super likely, we need Michigan to like win out now, which again, I don't think either one of us really had Michigan like being a super dominant team this year, but like we need that help of like, hey dude, that's our one loss to Michigan. And, look, Michigan won the Big Ten, right? We need that to boost our resume. But, taking my USC bias out, I think USC got a little bit of help from like that LSU game, although big at the time, and it was a big win. And it was a defining moment for USC because it was like, all right, we fixed the problem. So I think we got a boost from like everybody got a little overhyped there. Turns out LSU's maybe not as good of a team as we thought they were when USC beat them. I think USC is still a good team. We need help though, not only to like, we need a ton of help to get to the Big Ten championship, but I think we need some help even just to get to the playoff now at this point.
Yeah. Penn State's 8. Number 9, I have Oregon. What about you?
I got Utah. Simply just because they were my first team out. And again, this was just like me being cheeky with the numbers of like, I knew Oklahoma State and Utah were playing. They were both my first 2 teams out. So it's kind of like whoever wins that game is going to kind of get pole vaulted into, they're now the clear front runner for the Big 12. So I don't like, I'm not in love with it. I could see it easily changing. And the primary reason for that is just Cam Rising just seemed to like can't stay on the field, like they're a different team. And the fact that they won was surprising. So you got to give them that. However, most of that, the reason you're kind of high on Utah is because of Cam Rising's talent and experience. And if he can't stay healthy or be consistently on the field, it's probably not going to work out well for Utah. And I will say, we kind of talked about this offline of like, dude, watch out for the trap game against Arizona, right? Like Arizona lost to Kansas State pretty bad and everybody wrote them off immediately. And then Utah comes off this big win, like we talked about. Hey, this is kind of cementing us in that Big 12 championship. Arizona's going to put up some points, man. And if Cam Rising's ain't out there playing and they can't put up points and keep pace with them, just watch out for the trap.
I feel you on that. For me, the reason Oregon's here is I know Oregon has talent. Like in terms of just a complete team, I feel like Oregon's a little bit better, well-rounded. They haven't lost. Did they struggle weeks 1 and 2? Yes, especially the Idaho struggle is more compounding. Like I almost give them a pass with Boise State. It's like I know Boise State's the better of the non-Power 5 teams. Then they come out, they handled their business against Oregon State. They have a bye. So I don't have a lot of sample size. I totally get giving Utah the benefit of the doubt because of, hey, you get a good win at versus Oklahoma State. You've shown that you've needed to do. I agree with you, though, that the Cam Rising situation is hurting Utah from the standpoint of in practice, both guys can't get all the reps. So it's like either this guy's going to be healthy and this is our leader, this is who we're going with, which Cam Rising to me is the better quarterback.
Oh, yeah.
But the problem is that when not healthy, that team, like we see it, when there's a switch, it completely changes what Utah's offense is.
100%.
And it makes it very difficult for you to sit back and buy into Utah because it's like, this is the broken record of Utah that Cam Rising at some point is going down during the season. It's just a matter of when. And when that happens, Utah's not the same team that's ranked high.
So leading into that, I've got Oregon at 10.
Okay.
And kind of for all the same reasons, the big issue that I had with Oregon, like you said, is just I think they're good. And this is where it's difficult to like separate facts from feelings. Like I feel that they're a good team. They've shown that they can be a good team. But like box score and watching the games hasn't really proven it to me. You know what I mean? Like this is kind of like the first like where I'm not really going off of like what I've seen, and it's more of like potential. And that's where I've dropped them. If they had a big win where it's like, hey, that was a clear defining win, which I don't think Oregon State was. Like they handled their business, but like nobody thought really Oregon State was a threat other than because it's a rivalry game. Like they don't have that big win, and they have kind of struggled. So to me, it's like I don't know how you give them the edge. I do think they're a better team, like again from a feelings standpoint, but the facts don't lead me there.
Well, my number 10 is USC.
Ooh.
So I've got them 10. I got Utah 11.
Wow.
USC
Thank
to me, yeah, I know. I like US. Like I sit back and watch that game, and it's can they get what was broken fixed? Yes. You gave up 3 big runs. Like and really you gave up 1 run there at the end that cost you the stinking game. Like if the guy had him wrapped, like if he takes him down, in my opinion, the game's over. Michigan it looks horrific on USC. Michigan had what, like 34 yards of passing offense?
Something like that.
Michigan's going to lose some games. Like, I hate saying this because we'll talk about them later when I get to Michigan. Heads up, they're making it at some point in the later of this list. They're not going to continue to win games throwing for 34 yards. The trenches for Michigan won, especially on the defensive side. It was like, I felt bad for Miller Moss. It was just like, it sort of looked like CW at some points. It was like, except he didn't have CW's wheels, that he was just getting blasted. Did they make the plays there at the end of the game? Yes. It was one of those ones that it took him the second half to sort of figure out, hey, blitz from here, doing this. Like for Lincoln Riley to develop the playbook to be like, all right, send guys here. This is how we're going to do. They made some second half adjustments that put them right back into the game. And they got real fortunate on that, you know, on 3rd and goal, Miller Moss gets hit, defensive tackle picks it up. Marks makes sort of the play of the game with stripping him. Then USC scores a touchdown. There was just so many different things. And then, like you said, if Michigan doesn't miss that extra point, they're not going for it. They're going to kick a field goal and go into overtime.
It's one of those, like, you know, we think it's good at the time because it's like, we saved a point, but it almost ends up working against us at the end of the game because, you know, they're probably, you know, when they know, hey, we got to have a touchdown. If they could have just kicked a field goal to go to overtime, most coaches are probably making that choice.
Yes. So it's yet again, it's putting a lot on USC. I think that USC will bounce back fine. You know, they have a few weeks before they end up playing Penn State. They get them at home, which makes it even better for them. Who knows what Penn State is this year? Week 1, we're like, oh, they kill West Virginia. Well, then West Virginia doesn't look good. And that's sort of, this is where college does a really poor job of like reevaluating rankings as the season goes on. It's like we never sit back and go back to week 1 and we're like, ooh, they were ranked way too high. Like Pat McAfee was picking West Virginia because he's a grad to win the Big 12. And then it's like after a few weeks, you're like, Big 12's terrible. Like West Virginia's terrible. They had no business being up there. It was a big game week 1. Now, after a few weeks, you're like, it wasn't really impactful, which when I talk about USC, I do say it tongue in cheek because LSU doesn't look good. Like they're not the same LSU from last year. They have struggled in games. They struggled against South Carolina. I don't know how to.
So again, it's like relativity though, right? Like LSU is still a good football team.
Yes, 100%.
Right? Yeah, like that's not to take away from the win. It's like with this Michigan game. Would you rather win than lose? Like obviously, duh, like no kidding. However, it's just like you try to take things like, does LSU look like a competitive LSU team, not for what we're used to standard wise, but if you're going to have them go up against, some other ACC team, right? Like it's a relative type of thing. So that's just kind of where.
If USC wins out, but let's say they lose to Ohio State, like that's their big loss. So they have Michigan and Ohio State as their two losses. And then the argument is, well, Notre Dame only has one loss to NIU. I will fight people on the street.
Like that won't happen because Notre Dame and USC play.
Never mind. So, but in that scenario, it's like
I see what you're getting at, though. Like it's
we
difficult.
need to evaluate losses. Like it's not just one in the loss column. That is where we got to this argument a season or two ago with Bryce Young in Alabama, losing at the last second to Tennessee, losing the last second in overtime to LSU. I sat back and I'm like, yes, did they lose? Is it two loss columns? Yes. And I'm not trying to say that they don't count, but there's a difference in like, hey, we lost to two really good teams versus we lost to NIU. Like for me, Notre Dame, they're just in a position that I have a hard time like talking about Notre Dame. It's like, dude, you lost to a team that you were 20.5-point favorites to, and then the very next week they go up and they follow it up to a loss to Buffalo. Like, I'm sorry, dog. Like that loss looks horrific now. Like, and there's no overcoming it. There's nothing that you're going to be able to do to make NIU look better, even though the pollsters tried to do it.
They tried
putting them in.
Try to give them the SEC treatment.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. I'm not going to sit back and argue that. Like, all the back 15 is making the top 15's resumes look good.
Yes.
That's it.
After the fact, too. It's not before the fact. It's after the fact.
After the fact. 100%. So I've got Utah at 11. Who do you have?
So it's funny because you kind of made all the points for me, but I got Michigan at 11. And again, this is where it's like I'm separating facts from feelings. Or, maybe because I'm mad that they beat USC. So I'm like, oh, yeah, Michigan's better. I'm doing exactly what we just criticized everybody else for. I didn't think Michigan was going to be very good this year. I agree with you that, like, they need to improve. Otherwise, they're going to quickly fall off this list. However, as it stands right now, it's hard to, like, take away the fact that, like, I had USC at 8 last week. What'd you have them last week? 4?
Yeah, I think 4 or 3.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like you got this team who only losses to Texas. And now it was a bad loss. They didn't look very good. That was also with a different quarterback. And it's the number 1 team in the nation. Right? But then they go out and beat your number 4 team, my number 8 team. Like, you got to give them some credit for that. Right? Like, again, I don't think they're going to. I kind of hope they stay on this list because it makes USC's strength of schedule look stronger. But like as it stands right now, they beat a good USC team. And when you're comparing them against some of these other teams, I feel like that's got to mean something. You know what I mean? Like, how do you put like Oklahoma State ahead of them, right? They've got 1 loss too, but theirs is to Utah. Like, I think a loss to Texas looks a heck of a lot better than a loss to Utah. Like, Missouri's undefeated, but like, they struggled against Vandy. You know what I mean? Like, when you're trying to go relative as far as like where they fit in the schedule, like you got to give it to Michigan right now just because of what they were able to do. Now, like you already talked about it, they need a lot of work, but as it stands, I got to give Michigan the edge there.
I mean, good on you. You put them at 11. I had Michigan sitting at 12. That's where I bumped them back up. And that's because I sit back and I look at the trenches and I go, the trenches is fantastic. We knew that last year with Michigan. That's why they won the Natty. It was both lines of scrimmage were dominated by Michigan throughout the entire season. Can they fix quarterback? Because they get some time to sort of figure it out. But if they can't figure out quarterback, that's where the game changes for Michigan. Because you can't win this old like wing T offense, not, or I guess even better, like sort of a service academy of we'll break a few runs and it will get us there in the end. That's not going to do it over the course of the season for Michigan. Michigan's got to find a way to come out and have some better wins in terms of just offensive production. Now, taking a look at Michigan's schedule of where they're going from here, they play Minnesota, at Washington, at Illinois, versus Michigan State, And then it's not really until November 2nd do they play versus Oregon at home. That, in my opinion, that's really the next big test before they get sort of 2 bye weeks in Indiana and Northwestern before playing at Ohio State. Michigan has every reason to go into November 2nd with only the loss of Texas being on their schedule. That will help USC in the long run, but we'll see how Michigan is able to improve over the following weeks.
So when I originally wrote out the list, I did have Michigan at 12. And then again, I just kind of started talking about the relative, because my number 12, just to jump ahead, is Missouri. They are undefeated.
Okay.
But again, it's just like they look good, but they've kind of been dominant, but they haven't really played anybody, right? Like their team has been, or their schedule has been weak. Right now, Missouri has the ability to play people in the SEC and make their strength of schedule look stronger. But as it stands right now, yeah, I'm sorry. A loss to Texas doesn't make you worse than a overtime to Vandy. Like that's bad in my opinion, right? Like we've joked about Vandy and like Vandy looks better than Vandy normally does, but like, sorry.
Well, Vandy's kicker missed it too. They had a chance to send it again. Like,
and I'll also say, like, you're right in that they're not going to win a natty running this offense, but they can absolutely go all the way to the Big Ten championship running this offense. And I know you talked about that Oregon game, but like, to be honest, we've talked about this at the beginning of the season. Oregon has never matched up well against big hog mollies. Like that's never been Oregon's strength, where it's like, we're going to get down and dirty in the trenches. Oregon usually loses those games. So that's the Big Ten, right? And it's college. Like you're definitely not getting away with that in the NFL. And it looks silly when you think about it in that situation. But I mean, let's be honest, it's college. Weirder things have happened, right? So like that's kind of where I gave the edge to Michigan and put Missouri at 12, just because although they looked good, again, you start looking at schedules and stuff, and you're like, oh man, Missouri's not doing anything.
Great. I'll get to Missouri here in a minute. This is where probably my bigger surprise team is, and I'm ready to battle. Number 13.
Wait, who's your 12?
My 12th was Michigan.
Oh, who was your 11 then?
Utah. So I had USC at 10.
Oh, that's right. You had USC. Okay.
Utah at 11. Michigan at 12. I'll cut to the chase with my number 14 team, which is Mizzou.
Okay.
Number 13. Clemson.
I don't hate it. It seems out of pocket for like where they're at in the AP poll and kind of what's happened. But I already know where you're going to go, and I agree with you. So
which is they played home game for Georgia and Atlanta week 1. They came out slow, and as Georgia should have, beat the brakes off of them. Now people forget, what was the score going in a half? It was like 10 to 3 or something. Like it was a close game. Everyone was surprised at half.
It was 6-0.
Yeah. Like everyone was going in the half going, man, Clemson's better than we thought they were. Then the second half happened. They go, oh, Clemson's exactly who we thought they were. And then every week after that, they have absolutely just bell rang teams, just blasted them. Now, yes, you sit back and you go, well, who did they play? Not a whole lot of big name teams, but the last, they play App State, throttle them. But then last week they play NC State. I know the score is a little bit closer than it was. It ended up being 59-35, but it was like 59-3.
Yeah, Clemson started pulling people, and North Carolina State got a few trying to cover the spread touchdowns.
What was the difference between them and Tennessee? Nothing. Like they handled NC State the exact same way.
Yeah,
like
fair point.
Throttled them. So I sit back and I look at Clemson. And it's like, are we really going to punish them for losing to at the time the number 1 team in the nation in Georgia? Like this gives me shades of Oregon a few years ago, that Oregon got throttled here in Atlanta, and then they came back and they had a really good season where they were a tough team.
It took the entire season for people to forget about that first opening game.
Yes, and it hurt them because it was a 4-team playoff. So it was just, they were behind the sticks from the get-go. This season, I sit back and I look at Clemson's schedule. Like we talk about Miami's schedule. Clemson plays Stanford, at Florida State, at Wake Forest, Virginia, Louisville, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt, the Citadel versus South Carolina. It's if Clemson wins out, which I think they should, and Miami wins out, which I think they should, whoever wins, I think both teams are in. Like, regardless of the outcome of the game. Because if Miami's sitting there with one loss, they're still going to be in. And if Clemson loses again, as long as Georgia doesn't like have this historic fold, which I don't see happening to Georgia, Clemson's in too. Like, both of those teams are playoff bound. I just sit back and it's like, you talk about Mizzou having they struggle against Boston College, which everyone's high on Boston College. Why? Because they beat Florida State. Like, was that a good win for them? Yeah, it was unlike Boston College. It's a bad Florida State team. Florida State needed every single second to beat Cal, and they hung on to win. Florida State's terrible. They were the first team in the history of the AP poll to be ranked in the top 10 and lose their first 3 games. Like, Florida State's bad. Mizzou struggle with Boston College, struggle with Vanderbilt. Like, honestly, I sit back and it's like, if it wasn't for Notre Dame losing to NIU, I'd probably put Notre Dame at 14 before I put Mizzou.
You're right. I mean, that's one of those where it's like, as it sits right now, that's the story. But based on what's going to unfold, there's going to be changes. And Mizzou playing in the SEC, it'll probably play itself out, and it will be silly that we're even talking about them right here. My number 13 is USC for kind of all the reasons that we've already talked about. They still have a decent path. It's just, they just lost to Michigan, so I got Michigan in there. I can't put USC ahead of them or anything like that. And then my number 13, and I'm not above changing it to Clemson at this point, but as I wrote it down, it was OK State, simply for the fact that now their only loss is to Utah. They could easily redeem that if they win out and then go to the Big 12 championship and beat Utah. And I think that's an absolutely, greater than 50% chance of happening that way. So that's where I give them their number 14 there as far as one of the first 2 out, but it can easily change going forward from there.
It makes sense. It's interesting because I think that with the 12-team playoff, we're going to get into some of these debates, which is Saban's always talked about it. Like, why should I punish Georgia for playing the schedule that they have and not punish like Miami for not playing anybody? Like, yes, did they go play Florida? They always play Florida. So, it's the schools of Florida. They're all trash right now, except for Miami. Like, they play one another. I sit back and I look at Ohio State. It's like, all Ohio State's playing this year. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to pull it up just to double check myself so I don't sound like an idiot. But they don't have a big out-of-conference game. They played Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall. Then they played Michigan State, Iowa, Oregon, Nebraska, Penn State, Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, Michigan. Have 0 big schools. Like, they're doing exactly sort of what Georgia did last year, which was, hey, we're just going to play SEC teams, no big out of conference. We don't have to worry about it. As long as we do what we should in SEC play, we're in. Oh, that's what Ohio State's doing this year. Like, why am I going to go punish Clemson for losing to Georgia when Ohio State didn't play anybody? But yet Ohio State's sitting here getting first place votes that you talked about. That's what infuriates me.
Yep.
Like, there's no accountability for how you're scheduling stuff. Like, it's poor. It's poor. Like,
and again, part of the reason with that is I think these rankings, like these preseason rankings that kind of like predetermine the rest of the season. If we went into the season blank slate and it was like, you got to play people to get yourself into that 12-team playoff, there'd be out of state, blockbusters every weekend. You know what I mean? But because that's not the case, it's just like, hey, survive and just don't lose, and I'll make the 12-teamer. You're going to get this every single year.
100%. So it's tough. That's why I had USC above Michigan. Like, I know that Michigan won. I get that. I just sit back and I go, the likelihood that you're going to have these 3 big runs again, like if they play again in the playoff, I'm betting the truck on USC to win that game.
Yeah, and like, you kind of talked about it at the beginning. Like, this isn't what we expect the final rankings to be. This is kind of just like as we see it right now. A lot of this stuff will naturally play itself out throughout the course of the rest of the season.
But I can still get mad about it now.
That's what we do best.
It's what I do best. Just anger and pettiness. That's what you're going to get. But that wraps up the rankings. You got anything else?
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll check in next week after the big games this week. Peace out.